Review of Barbara Moss. This is part of the Legal History Project of the Nashville Bar Association. Today is February the 10th, 2022. We are at the Nashville Bar Association office, and I am Mary Burrs, and I have the honor of interviewing Ms. Moss today. Good morning, Barbara.
Good morning. Good morning.
You have forged a path for many lawyers, men and women. And what we want to know today is what it was like for you starting out in the practice of law in the late 1970s. Quite a story. But before we get to that, we need to understand the background and how you started out in life and what led to it all. And so I'm going to ask you to tell us a little bit about where you were born and about your childhood.
Well, I was born in Memphis, Halloween of 1950. I was born to wear costumes. It's the way I look at it. My father was a veterinarian and my mother was a housewife. They didn't say that you worked at home back then. And my parents had 4 children. I went to school in Memphis. And then when I was in the 8th grade, we moved to Germantown, which was an isolated little one stoplight town back then. There were more horses in Germantown than people when I moved there. And I went to middle school there. Every day in middle school is an attempt to avoid humiliation. And I was a nerdy, smart little girl in an anti-intellectual Southern town. And that pretty much describes my high school career. Was the only girl in the 8th grade that didn't get rushed for a sorority. But, and you think your whole life is defined by high school, but it's not.
Did you work in high school?
I had my one and only job in high school was that I was a soda jerk at the drugstore in Germantown, and I developed really good right biceps muscles, and it paid 75 cents an hour.
Wow.
Yeah, I was well employed.
And what about college?
You know,
after that experience, did you want to go to college?
Oh yeah, all of us were raised that we were going to go to college. There was a counselor at my little high school, but as far as I know, I never talked to a counselor about college. I knew that there was this school called Vanderbilt. I had so little knowledge about college, but I applied at Vanderbilt and got in. And my parents were willing to send me to Vanderbilt. And I think the first year at Vanderbilt, the entire year cost $1,800 for tuition and everything.
Oh my goodness.
So I came to Vanderbilt in 1968. Now, you know, Martin Luther King was killed in Memphis the spring of that year when I was a senior in high school.
That's right.
Yeah.
That was a turbulent year.
It was a turbulent year.
And the start of a number of turbulent years.
Yes, yes.
And there you were in college during that time. Did you like to read in your?
Oh my gosh, I loved to read in high school. I was probably consuming 5 or 6 novels a week in high school.
Wow.
My teachers would call on me and I would have my head buried in a book.
So when you got to Vanderbilt, what did you want to study or?
Well, the first thing you should know about me coming to Vanderbilt is that there were 6 men for every woman. So my dating life improved tremendously at Vanderbilt. And
other than that, what did you?
And I felt like I fit in for the very first time.
Why do you think that was?
Well, it was okay to be smart. It was okay to be smart. I started in 68. The 60s got to Vanderbilt in 1970. So in the time that I was in college, it was Cambodia, it was Kent State. I became a hippie co-ed. Now, some of my friends accused me of still being a hippie. Randy Kennedy accused me of still being a hippie. And actually, I think in a way that's true. If you were a hippie, you kind of always are in that same kind of place.
By the beat of a different drummer.
Well, in some ways, you always have that we're going to change the world feeling if you went to college in those times.
And that's how you felt when you went to college?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Or maybe during
We were
college?
going to, you know, change the world. We were going to end the war in Vietnam, you know.
Sure.
Now, the first year that I started at Vanderbilt, I pledged a sorority. And I was pretty good. I was, you know, pretty accomplished at playing the piano, and I could play the guitar. And
Of course.
folk music was a thing. And I joined a jug band and played with my sorority and played in a jug band. But now then by the 1969, so I was only 17 when I came to college. And then in 1969, when I was 18, that was my sophomore year. And by then I de-pledged that sorority. And so there was the first indication. What happened is I watched Rush from the other side, and I was so uncomfortable with picking and choosing among my peers that I'm pretty sure that they said, well, you can't pick any Black girls because the other sisters in the sorority wouldn't want it. So I was out of there. They made me give back my pen by the year that I was a sophomore. And that after that sophomore year, two really important things happened to me. One is that I signed up for the Student Health Coalition. Now, the Student Health Coalition was a group of medical students, law students, and undergraduates who partnered with the TVA to take health fairs to isolated Appalachian towns. It was an amazing group. If I hadn't met those law students in that group, I don't know whether I would have thought about law school.
Isn't it interesting as you think back now on those formative experiences that you were not really aware of as being formative, but that were?
Oh yeah, and this was just an amazing experience. We were interviewed on 60 Minutes. It was a wonderful, amazing. We lived with the people in Appalachia. We would go from week to week to different towns, but the week we were in White Oak, Tennessee, we lived with coal miners, you know, in their houses.
Did you do this during the school year?
During the summer.
Oh, during the
During the summer after my sophomore year. Now, in that process, I met a charming, handsome pediatrician who rode a motorcycle.
The motorcycle was part of it.
And
then what
most
happened?
women know that there's going to be a punchline to that story, but I won't tell the punchline for a while.
Sure.
The other thing that happened to me after my sophomore year is that I was a risk taker at heart. I signed up for the first co-ed dorm at Vanderbilt. The first co-ed dorm at Vanderbilt had 24 people in it. Well, a couple of advisors, 12 men and 12 women. And so it was the self-selected risk takers at Vanderbilt. This little house was across from the SAE house. It's where the parking garage stands now. And I think it's the Stadium Club that's at the top of the parking garage. But that's where this little house with the fire escapes, I say little, 3-story house with the fire escapes. And so my junior year, after we went off to Appalachia, I was in this co-ed dorm. And that also so there were 24 of us, and each of us cooked for everybody once a month. And so that began my life of giving parties, because I discovered that as long as you have good food, it doesn't matter if things are clean. It doesn't matter if things are straight.
But what interests me is how you grew when you went to college. You had described yourself and in high school, as someone who spent a lot of time reading, was not necessarily a social person. And then in college, you had such a transformation.
I did. Now, the other thing that was so transforming is that I majored in philosophy. Now, the philosophy department at Vanderbilt at the time was the second largest department after the English department. And the reason was that for 3 years in a row, the professors in the philosophy department had won the Chancellor's Cup for best teacher. So that was John Compton, who was head of the department, Charles Scott, who taught existentialism, and John Locke, who was just a fabulous teacher and stayed on for years. It was wonderful. And for a long time, I thought, well, I majored in philosophy, but I never picked up another book of philosophy in my life after I left college. But it changes you to really look deeply at ideas. What does it mean to know? What does it mean to be? What does it mean, so the rest of your life, you look at things and think, what does it mean to be an American? What does it mean to be a lawyer? All of those. So I've realized that education shaped me in a lot of ways too. So, well, I really loved college. Now I want to tell you that I didn't study a lot in college. I never studied it until I got to law school. I did not study. I studied the night before the exam.
But you learned a lot.
Oh, I learned a lot. And I went to every class. Mm-hmm. I didn't cut classes.
Right.
It was a hotbed of activity. And I will say that Vanderbilt, the only big demonstration I ever remember at Vanderbilt was to do away with the PE requirement. Vanderbilt was not a hotbed
were you
of activity.
Demonstrating for that?
Vanderbilt was not a hotbed of activity. We had a fabulous chancellor. Alexander Hurd was the chancellor,
right.
and he was ahead of the students.
Yes.
So he was there at every turn going, yes, you can have a co-ed dorm. When we had our 10th year reunion of the co-ed dorm, he came to it. He was a wonderful chancellor.
But what amazes me also, as you speak, is that transformation. You said that you came from many of your growing up years were in Germantown, which was a small community, and perhaps not one where ideas were given a lot of value. And you came to Vanderbilt, and you just breathed it all in, didn't you?
I did. I was ready to be transformed, and I was lucky. I've been so amazingly lucky in my life. So you're going to hear about the hard experiences. I want to tell those, but gratitude really helps your frame of mind.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
I want to move on. We need to talk about law school, but what you've said about college, though, is so interesting to see how you started to become who you are, and who we know as the Barbara Moss that we know today. And Vanderbilt has was such an influence on you. How did you?
Now let me say that the year after college is when I married the charming, handsome pediatrician.
Okay. How old were you at the time?
I was 23.
Oh, so old.
So old. No, I was 22. And one of the questions is, did you have any military service? Well, he had deferred military service under the Berry Plan. So he went into the Army in Fort Bragg, North Carolina as a major. And so when I moved to North Carolina, he said to me, are you going to visit the officers' wives? And I'm like, no, I'm a hippie and I'm 24 years old. No, I'm not going to visit the officers' wives. But it was an interesting time to be the wife of a major.
Yes.
It was all the way with the
Of
MVA,
someone
the Model Volunteer Army.
Yes, somebody in the military.
Right. We had ended the draft. It was the Modern Volunteer Army. He was a pediatrician. He spent 2 days in basic training, one in shooting a pistol and the other one on whom to salute and how to salute.
And And that got him through. But then someplace along the line, you had the idea about law school. How
Right.
did that happen?
Well, I got out of law school with that degree in philosophy.
You got out of college.
I got out of college with that degree in philosophy. Actually, I went home to Memphis for about 6 months and was a welfare worker in Memphis. Then I went to the Army life, which was a different, so I'd seen the population in Appalachia, the population as in Memphis as a welfare worker, the population in the Army, which was a very different situation. And at no place was I very employable. You know, I'd never been in a law office, but I had met law students. And finally, and I knew from being married to a doctor that my self-esteem would not survive without a graduate degree, because I saw the way that people treated him. And I had to be more than the doctor's wife. So I said, well, I can go to school. I know how to go to school. And I signed up for law school. And we had returned to Nashville. I hadn't mentioned the fact that my husband was 8 years older and had 2 children. So 2 years out of undergraduate school, I started law school, and I was 23 years old. And the month that I started law school, my stepchildren, who were 13 and 11, moved in with me.
Wow.
And I became a law student and a supermom.
At the same time.
At the same time.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's hard enough to do one or the other,
Yeah.
but both at the same time.
Well, I just thought I was perfectly grown up.
And not with babies, but with kids
who are older.
who are pre-adolescent or adolescent. Wow. So how is this all going to work? You have to go on with the story. Tell us.
Well, you know, I worked during the daytime. You know, I've studied at school. I came home and made dinner every night. I was, you know, I did have to study in law school. And my first year of law school was very intimidating. We had contracts with Paul Hartman, who must have seen Paper Chase or had been, or maybe Paper Chase was modeled after Paul Hartman. He was very tough on the students. And I remember that when he first called on me in class, I was wearing a sweater with fringe on it. And my friends could see the fringe trembling from the back row.
And you were first year law student.
Yes.
With
Yes.
a powerhouse.
Yes. Now, the real powerhouse, though, was Tom McCoy, who taught constitutional law. And my classmate, Tom Brothers, on our very first class of constitutional law, Tom McCoy stood him up and began to use the Socratic method. And he was so good with the Socratic method. He had Tom Brothers on his feet the entire class.
Oh, wow.
The next class, he said, "Mr. Brothers, are you with us?" Called on Tom Brothers again. Yeah, oh, we were terrified. And along about the...
And parenthetically, Tom Brothers later became Judge Tom
That's
Brothers.
right. That's
so
right.
He didn't quit at
That's
that
right.
time.
He did not quit. About on our maybe 5th, 10th class, Tom McCoy called on a student and he said, "Let's move on to the next case." And I raised my hand and said, "Well, actually, I don't understand this case." And I got a round of applause. And that was the beginning of my law career, because I was then elected to the Honor Council. I was elected to the Honor Council in my first year of law school.
First year of law school. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And later you became president of
Right.
the Honor
Right.
Council.
Eventually, I was president of the Honor Council, and which sort of ties in with being eventually chair of the Board of Professional
Sure.
Responsibility.
Sure.
Then, you know, at that point, you wrote anonymously for the law review. It was not based on grades at all. So I got on the law review after my first year. And you know, I loved my law school classes and my class. I love my classes and I love my class. There were wonderful people in my law school class.
And law review, did you enjoy doing that?
I did, but I didn't want to run for the law editor positions. I thought that was just more high school yearbook kind of things. I worked hard in the daytime, but I did not study at night. I discovered that my method was to read all the stuff, pay attention in classes, study for an entire day before each exam, and give the law professors what they wanted to hear. Now later, when I was teaching at law schools, people would say, oh, the law professors just want to know what they told you. And I was like, well, yeah.
Well, it's reaffirming, isn't it?
Yeah, well, that's what you thought was.
The whole semester.
I discovered how to give the law professors what they wanted, and I was order of the court by the time I graduated.
Wow. Did you give thought about what you wanted to do while you were in law school? Did you give thought about what you wanted to do afterwards,
No.
actually practicing law?
Well, kind of. So after your first and the second year of law school, you were interviewed for a position as a clerk. Now, what I need to say about those interviews is that every single law firm asked me if I planned to practice law.
Why was that? Why?
The first time I'm like, as opposed to what? I'm not in medical school, but they assumed that I was going to quit and be a housewife.
Well, now this is in the 1970s.
Yeah.
And Vanderbilt, though, had a rather
Had a robust class.
yes, that
Women.
included, yes, women. Right.
Now, about in the year or two before I started law school, Vanderbilt Law School went to 1/3 women. After I started, they had to remodel a bathroom and make so that women had a bathroom
Sure.
that wasn't just one stall
Yeah.
upstairs. So there was a robust class, but still in the law firms, there was this idea that you were going to quit. And really, the women lawyers who were ahead of me that went into the law firms often didn't have children. One law firm said, we have to ask you, what are you going to do about children? And I said, well, I already have stepchildren.
Right.
you
Right.
know, And one interesting experience was I interviewed with Lamar Alexander at his firm, which I don't remember now the name of that firm, but he said, we might offer you a summer job, but if we do, we're not going to offer you a position as an associate. So if you get a different offer, you should take it. And I always appreciated his honesty for that. And Boult Cummings, there was one large law firm that was saying, maybe we could try one woman. So Waller refused to interview me. A friend of mine was there and asked them to interview me, and they refused. Bass didn't take a woman until the following year, and Boult Cummings decided they would try one woman.
What a difference between the law school experience and the decision of Vanderbilt
Right.
to ensure that there were at least 1/3 of the class as women. What a difference between that and the.
And getting a job at a firm.
Yeah, it's
Well,
not a
Ruth Bader
disconnect.
Ginsburg didn't get any job offers. So, I always tell people I was not a better candidate than Ruth Bader Ginsburg, but I came along at a slightly different time.
But you still forged ahead. You were not dismayed by this. You were not
Well,
put off by it.
yes, but let me just say, I was clueless.
Sometimes that's a good thing, huh?
I had no idea this was going to be hard. And actually that served me well for a long time. But anyway, I had that summer job at Boult Cummings. You'd asked me if I decided what kind of law I wanted to do. Well, during that summer, John Connors was hired to close down Webb Pierce's guitar shapes. So Webb Pierce in Oak Hill, in a residential neighborhood zoned for residents only, had a guitar-shaped swimming pool. Was on the same street as the governor's mansion. And this was the second largest tourist attraction in Nashville after Opryland.
What a mess.
Because the Blue Line buses would go out, they had a big bus terminal on West End, Broadway. They would go out to the homes of the stars, and halfway through, they would stop at Webb Pierce's house. He had built a bus pad on this street that had the governor's mansion. Now, he'd been sued by a neighbor to shut down this operation, and the neighbor hadn't won the lawsuit. And so Oak Hill hired John Connors, who was a wonderful lawyer. So as that clerk at Boult Cummings, I rode the tour bus to the homes of the stars. I got out at Webb Pierce's guitar-shaped swimming pool with John Connors, and we walked up, and Webb Pierce was there in his rhinestone-studded sunglasses, and I bought an album from him. And we got back on the bus and went back down to downtown Nashville, and we went to the Country Music Wax Museum, which existed at that time. And then we went to Tootsie's and had a beer.
Wow, law doesn't get any better than that, does it?
And I'm like, well, I want to be a trial lawyer. And for the rest of the time that I was in litigation, oh my gosh, the field trip at the beginning is the most fun ever.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So when you finished law school, you went to,
Well, let me add one thing about my third year. I had a baby in my third year.
oh, gracious. Okay.
Yeah. Now, really, there were a lot of law students that thought Boult would rescind their offer. Yeah, yeah. I was told later that they were watching to see if Boult rescinded their offer when I got pregnant. I made a very bad choice. I had a child in my last semester, and I decided, well, I won't take litigation because I won't take trial advocacy because I learned that on the job. Anyway, like I say, it was
So when you took the bar exam,
I graduated with she was born in February. I had a 6-month-old when I took the bar exam. You know, but the bar exam was at night, and you know, it was fortunately I knew a pediatrician that had children, you know, that was my husband's partner. That helped. You just know one person that had done it.
but
right.
Boult did not rescind its offer.
No.
And so after the bar exam and all of that fun, you started out at Boult.
I did.
And what was that experience like for you?
Well, here's where we need to put in the photo. So I want to, in giving this interview, I gave a lot of thought to what I wanted to cover. And what I really want to give people a sense of is what it was like to be that first woman. So Boult, when I say I was the first woman in a big law firm, I think I was the 16th lawyer, $16,000 a year. I think Bass maybe had 18 or 19 lawyers. I don't know how many Waller had, but these were the big law firms. And I want to give people a sense of that. So this photograph that I've asked them to put in with this gives you a real sense. You know, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Now, I'm going to tell you the law firms I worked for and the dates. But then I don't want to call these law firms out for what happened. I'm going to call out the ones that did the great things for me.
And it's really important to keep in mind, to put this all in the context, that this is late 70s, early 80s. At this point, for example, Ronald Reagan, when he became president, decided that he was going to appoint a woman to the Supreme Court, the first woman. And before that, there had been no woman on the on the
one
United States.
African American, no women.
Exactly. And so it's a very, very different world that you're describing from the way it is today, February 2022.
Not only had my law partners never seen a woman lawyer, we had all grown up watching I Love Lucy, I Dream of Jeannie, Bewitched. We were all fish swimming in the same water. I was trying to figure it out as much as they were. on the way down here today, I thought, I should talk about all the controversy about what to wear.
Well, people do.
Oh my gosh, we wore suits with
Little bow.
little
bows.
silk bows
Yes.
at the throat. We didn't know what to wear. Now, later on, I realized that my style of dress was going to be, I'm a woman, get over it. And I had a pink power suit, and we'll talk about how I started to wear hats. And, you know, I became much more confident in being a woman lawyer.
But don't
But
you?
when I started out, I didn't have any of that confidence.
Well, and there really was no context, was there?
There's no context.
At that time,
No.
how to be a woman and a lawyer,
Right.
because it had been
Right.
such a field that traditionally had belonged to men.
Right.
And so it took
Right.
a while.
Somebody once told me, you know, the trailblazer, she's the one with the arrows in her back.
Oh.
So, and nobody ever runs up and catches up with
Yes.
you, you know.
So
So-
you were going to tell us about the
So
firms that
I
you
was
belonged to.
at Boult Cummings from 77 to 81. I was at Gullett, Sanford, Robinson, and Martin from 81 to 96. Oh, by the way, Gullett, Boult was in the building that was the first American Center, and now is where the Jeff Ruby Steakhouse is. Gullett, Sanford, Robinson was in the building across from the arcade that was the Metropolitan Federal Building, and it is now the Bobby Hotel with a bus on top. And then I was at Wyatt, Tarrant and Combs from 1996 to 2005 in the City Center building first, and then the building that was on West End, the 2525 West End building, where Starbucks is now, but it also had a Barnes and Noble bookstore there. It's right next to Natchez Trace. Then I was with Stites and Harbison from 2005 to 2009 in the Fifth Third Bank building, and then in that new building across from next to the Ryman. And then I'll talk about after 2009. I led litigation in all of those firms.
So you were working for major Nashville firms,
Right,
large firms,
right,
and doing litigation
right.
in those firms, one right for each.
One right after the
One
other.
right after the other. How was that for you? And how was your practice of litigation?
Well, once again, I was having to make it up. For the first 10 years, there was not a woman in a case that I was in as lawyer or judge. So, so let me just say, there were advantages to that.
How so?
First of all, everyone knew who I was. Other than Muriel Robinson, who was quite something when she swept into the courtroom in her mink coat, I was the only woman sitting there. So people learned my name right away. And I started out as that woman lawyer, but quickly I became that brilliant woman lawyer, because you can't lose to a woman who's not brilliant. Now I will say, oh my gosh, the members of the bar who were so kind to me, who went back to my law firm and said she did a good job, who told me how to ask a non-leading question. I mean, I'll never forget them.
That is reaffirming.
I will
wasn't it?
never forget them. They were the Nashville bar was so congenial and so kind on the whole. Really the tough part was the law firms, because in the law firms, people saw me as their wife, sister, or mother, or girlfriend. You know, they just didn't see me as a lawyer. And you know, your law partners often are not in court watching you. They don't see your mistakes, and they don't see your triumphs either.
Now, everybody who starts out in law, I'm making a generality and I really shouldn't, but many people who start out, especially in litigation, find it a difficult road to travel. It's difficult to get your sea legs. And
Well,
was that apart from the fact that you were a woman, you were starting out in litigation as well?
it was, well, I will say this. Part of being clueless and and certainly part of having, okay, so you would never pick litigation for someone with low self-esteem. If you were thinking about it. But actually litigation for somebody with low self-esteem is the perfect career.
How so?
Because you get up there and pretend that you know what you're doing until one day you do. And there's something about me, there's some risk-taking part of me. Maybe I got off on the adrenaline, who knows? But I always loved litigation to the end. All the time that I did litigation, I loved it. Now, I will say this, winning cases never makes up for losing cases. You know, you can win 90% of your cases and you will be destroyed, not destroyed, you will be troubled by the cases that you lost. You will try them in your head.
Yes.
You will try them in your head. Now, when I began to teach, I told law students, it's like surfing. You ride the wave. But for the first 10 years, there was never a woman in the case. Actually, until 1995, when the O.J. Simpson case was tried and Marcia Clark was the lawyer, really no one had seen on TV a woman lawyer. So it was really that long. And so here's what I want to say about me as I talk about these law firms and what happened to me. I was astonishingly naive. When I didn't take litigation in law school, I didn't even know the difference between partner and associate. My dad is a veterinarian. I didn't know what the corporate world was like. I didn't realize my career path would be hard. I didn't know how to ask for help.
Who are some of the lawyers that you look back at?
Oh my gosh.
Who really
In
helped
that
you on this
first
one?
law firm, let me finish with my drawbacks.
Sure,
because
sure.
I want to make clear.
Okay, I want to make sure.
If I seem like I'm criticizing these law firms, I didn't know how to ask for help. I was absent-minded. I was the kind of person who was waiting for the professor to tell me what to do. You know, there are people who grasp quickly that it's their lawsuit, and I was not one of those. And I'm not a detail person. I'm really good at communicating in court. And I made a much better chief than I made an Indian. Now, I also had some pretty massive difficulties in my personal life, most of which I won't be talking about, but some of which were just, you know, being a mom. But I was a good writer and a good communicator. Now, in my first law firm, Mike Kaplan was such a dear man. I believe he was the first Jewish lawyer in any of these big firms. And he was such a friend. He was such a friend. Now, one thing I realized years later when I was studying discrimination against African Americans is people in your law firms don't think, well, I'm going to discriminate. That wasn't part of it. What happens is that they notice your mistakes. So I was talking to a young lawyer the other day who's gay and in a big law firm, and I was talking about this. And he said, yeah, you're on a short leash. So that's what happens. Now, in my first law firm, I worked with John Connors and was incredible. I saw 3 cases tried to a conclusion with Doug Fisher on the other side. So I was amazingly lucky. Lawyers don't get that experience anymore. That was incredible. Now, I want to talk about the level of technology. Well, first of all, the billable hour system had come in by the time I started at Boult. The level of technology was a Magcart machine, which is an electric typewriter with 1 paragraph of memory. 4 years later, and your secretaries took dictation. I believe there were those little machines that you could dictate into.
You could stop.
Very rough. But that was the level of technology. By the time I left Boult 4 years later, Magcart machines were gone and the Wang word processor was there. And we all know this joke where a lawyer asked a young male lawyer, do you have a Wang? That joke is still circulating.
It's still circulating. It's interesting. As you speak, law firms were we're dealing with the changes in law as well. Law schools were admitting not just male students, female students. They were broadening out, and the law firms were probably being or people were trying to apply to law firms.
And the technology was changing.
And the technology was changing. And so there are a lot of things going on in law firms, and law firms can certainly be very, very traditional. But they had to deal with these changes.
Right.
This is all going on at the same
Right.
time. There's no fault in this. It's
Right. There's no fault in these
no,
stories.
there really
No.
isn't. It's how the practice of law in Nashville changed.
Now, there was a book that came out right about this time. I don't know whether you remember this, called Future Shock.
Oh, yes.
And the premise of this book is that the future is coming at us faster and faster. Boy, technology is a good example. But okay, so the word processing machine, the big difference that it made is suddenly law firms could really oppress young lawyers with billable hour requirements. You could publish the billable hours that each associate had on a weekly basis once you had word processing, because it included computing power.
Well, that's no stress, is it?
Right, right. Now, I want to talk about difficulties in that first law firm about being a woman lawyer. The first lawyer I was assigned to told me over and over that I needed to be at home with my children. So it violated his belief structure. Then I was assigned to another lawyer when I became pregnant with my second daughter. And Boult was nice enough to give me 6 weeks of paid leave, which I felt very grateful for. But while I was pregnant, this lawyer came to me and said, Barbara, I've polled all my friends, and they say they would be prejudiced against you if you argued a case in front of them and you were pregnant. So he took all of my work away. And for about 3 months, I came into the office and sat around. Now, I was still getting some work from John Connors, and I remember the night I went into labor, I was in the middle of a brief, and I had them bring the day after I had my child, I had them bring me that brief, and I finished it in the hospital. You know, I worked until the day I went into labor. I was still working.
Law schools were not law schools. Law firms were really struggling.
They didn't know how to.
They
didn't know how
right.
to deal with
And
this.
I think from what you said that a lot of the members of the law firm were just personally struggling with how to incorporate
this in your belief system.
Exactly.
Now, I want to talk about getting work, because if I can say I had one consistent problem wanting to be a big time litigator in a large law firm, it was getting work. That first lawyer that took my work away, I said, but I want work. And he said, but Barbara, you're the only young mother we have. And that problem plagued me the entire time. It didn't matter what awards I got. It didn't matter what reputation I was in the bar. It didn't matter, super lawyer, anything, nothing mattered. It was a struggle to get work from my peers in the law firm. And when you're doing corporate litigation, if the head of litigation won't give you work, your goose is kind of cooked.
What did you do about this? Were you stuck?
I struggled.
Was there any time where you thought this is not working for me?
Yes, I went to my peers. I went to the managing partner. I generally found that no one helped me in that. Now, you know, but they didn't know. And again, they were seeing this wife, mother, sister, girlfriend. They didn't advertise that they had this great woman lawyer. They could really handle their cases, not even when I was doing employment law. Now, I was hired to get, and I was still, but I was still thought for the first 10 years, there must be something wrong with me. I must not be doing this well enough. I make mistakes. Oh my God, I make mistakes.
Who doesn't? Who doesn't?
But men don't talk. We're going to talk about that. Men don't talk about it. So I was hired at Gullett to get the senior partner organized. I'm not going to say who it was, but it turned out that he did not work. He did not even engage his brain. And at 4 years out of law school, I had the best caseload of any of my peers in Nashville because I had the total responsibility for his cases.
Wow. Were there any formative cases that you had?
Well, there's one I really want to talk about. About 5 years out of law school, my boss took a churning case for 6 plaintiffs in the Knoxville area.
You're saying the word churning?
Churning.
Churning, okay.
It was a plaintiff's case against a brokerage firm here in Nashville. And that brokerage firm in Nashville had a securities broker who to his clients said, we're going to buy options. And I know that this stock is going to go down or up. I know this stock is going to go up by the end of the week. So you just give me a check and I'll hold your check. And at the end of the week, we'll sell and I'll give you a check to cover your check. So he taught them check kiting. All 6 of these men. He was kiting checks in his own account, which went to the head of the firm. And these men lost everything. One lost $600,000. Some of them didn't have everything. He was a compulsive gambler. He was
This is in the 1980s or 19?
So this was 5 years out of law school. So in like 1982. One of them was blind and out of work when they led him onto the trading floor to trade in options. So this case was filed, we took these 6 cases. It was filed in front of, and I don't mind calling out judges. It was filed in front of, and it was assigned to Clore Morton. Now, Clore Morton was from Cookville, and he had a chip on his shoulder. And I won't go into that story, but if you got a case in front of him, he would set it for a trial for 2 months later. And if you filed for a continuance, he would only continue it if you agreed to try the case in Cookville so that he could stay home. So we filed this case. It was huge. It involved depositions every day. I was still married at this point. And when it went to trial, but what I did not understand, and by the way, the lawyer on the other side was very verbally abusive to me and my witnesses. Eventually, I did learn to rein other lawyers in. I learned to say, you can't talk to me like that. I'm going to stop this deposition if you yell at me or talk to me in that demeaning tone of voice. But anyway, he was very much like this. I learned a lot in this lawsuit.
You had to learn to do that.
Yeah. And when we went to trial, we laid it all out in front of the judge. And I didn't know 2 things. I didn't know my opposing counsel had clerked for Clore Morton. And I did not know that my boss had made statements in the press derogatory of Clore Morton. And yes.
I'm wincing.
When he thought he was running for that judge. And after we put on our case, the judge dismissed it on a motion to dismiss. And by the way, my boss took this case saying that he wouldn't make the plaintiffs pay the costs either, which was a violation of the ethics rules at the time. And we lost this case. But when I came home that night, my 6-year-old daughter said, Mom, next time I hope you win $100.
Wow, that's support, isn't it? And you need it the most.
And what I know from that case is you're not a real trial lawyer until you lose the case that you thought you could not lose.
What a lesson that was.
It changes everything.
It does.
It changes everything.
You have done a lot of, you have been very, very active in the bar.
can we come back to that?
Sure, of course.
Because I didn't get really active. I was a founding member, but I didn't get really active in the bar for a while because I was trying so hard to be a good lawyer for the first 12 years. So let me come back to that, Mary.
Sure, sure.
Because I need to say that when I was 34 at Gullett, so this was 1983, 4, I became a single mom. That charming, handsome pediatrician signed the divorce papers on his way to drug rehab. And he really dropped off the face of the earth for 2 years, which is kind of good. And I just want to say that I was a very, very happy as a single person, but I had a lot on me because he really was not a part of my children's upbringing.
But you were a single mom at that.
Oh, yeah.
that
I was a
time.
single
Not
mom and
only
a trial
practicing
lawyer
law
for 22 years.
for 22 years,
Yeah.
but you
Yeah.
did it as a single mom.
Yeah.
As well.
Now, about 7 years out of law practice, I began to teach at Vanderbilt because I thought to myself, you know, if I had just seen somebody doing this, it would have helped me. So I became an adjunct at Vanderbilt and I taught there for 20 years. And at first I taught writing, and then probably for 13 years, I taught trial advocacy. And
That's a lot to juggle.
but let me come back to the getting active with the bar.
Sure,
We're
sure.
at that point in the chronology.
Okay.
But you know, trial lawyers, we're always into chronology.
Putting it together for the jury.
12 years out of law school. Oh, you know, I want to talk about Gullett for a minute. I
Sure.
loved Val Sanford so much.
Oh, he was a
a
giant
fabulous lawyer,
and a giant of the Nashville
a
bar.
giant in the bar.
Yes.
He shaped me as much as my parents shaped me. If ever I have a claim to be intellectual, it's because of Val Sanford. Jack Robinson, I learned leadership from Jack Robinson because the 2 years that he was managing partner, we had 0 turnover.
Oh my.
We had 0 turnover. I loved Joe Martin. From Joe Martin, I learned that you can't be too honest to be a trial lawyer. Joe Martin would stand up in front of the court and he would start to talk and they would just settle back because they knew they would get the honest story.
That's the truth, the
Yeah.
truth, the true story.
Yeah.
What a wonderful opportunity
Oh my
that was
gosh.
for you
I
to
have
have examples like that.
been so lucky. So, but 12 years into the practice of law, I went to Val and I said, Val, why am I falling behind in terms of compensation? And he said, well, you probably won't be able to bring in business. Now,
This is 12 years. into
12
it.
years into my law practice. Now, when I started law practice, the myth was you don't have to worry about bringing in business. That's what we were told. And the reason was that that's what they were told, and they were all white men that belonged to Bellmead Country Club. And this was so fortunate that I got the message at 12 years out that the good old boy system was never going to bring me any work.
Mhm.
So I cried for 2 weeks. And then I got up and said, like I always tell my friends, I channeled the little red hen. I will do it myself. So I didn't know what it would take to bring in business. So I became the Johnny Appleseed of marketing. You go out there and you plant seeds everywhere.
Were you bitter about any of this? Did bitterness ever enter into this? Or
I didn't have room to be bitter. I mean, I had to support those 2 girls, you know.
just needed to bring
I
in.
had to support those 2 girls.
So go on.
I was the sole supporter of those 2 girls. So the Johnny Appleseed, it depends on what kind of work you want to bring in. So I wanted to bring in litigation. So to bring in litigation, one of the ways you do it is through the bar. So I became active in everything. And what I learned is the first year that you're on the committee, you find an active committee. The first year you agree to do something and then you do it. the next year, you're the co-chair, and the year after that, you're the chair, and the year after that, they nominate you for the board, and then you're on the board. So I was, and I learned so much. Charlie Warfield was the chair of the Minority Opportunities Committee. I just learned so much. And I was president of LAW, which was amazing. And the things that I remember best from that is I changed the whole system. And after my year, there were always co-chairs of every committee because we do it together, women.
Yes.
Yeah.
And truly, Barbara, when I came to Nashville and I started in law in Nashville, at that point, you were on so many committees and you were the president of LAW. And I can say for myself, I looked up to you. I looked up to you and said, that's what I want to be like. So,
well, I put on a mighty good front.
Well, but thank you for the example that you gave and for offering that example for the rest of us.
Well, that's sweet. But I was by this time I was on the board of professional responsibility. I chaired the board of professional responsibility. I was on the board of the NBA. I was on the board of the TVA. I was on boards of charitable organizations, especially University School, where my kids went to school. And it's a relationship town.
And that's the way that you found business.
Yes.
Mhm.
But I was still hampered because the way that you get business in these big law firms is that your corporate people bring in the corporations, and then you become, you get business through your law firm. Now, I kind of want to tell this in the right order, but who knows? It all kind of fits in there together. So the question is, when did you start wearing a hat?
Well, I want you to answer that question because it is your signature is your hat. When I first knew you, you did not wear a hat.
Right.
But then you started.
Well, we know when that happened.
How did all that come about?
Well, when in 1992, I practiced law with Todd Campbell. And in 1992, I went to Washington, D.C. for a seminar. And while I was there, he showed me around the West Wing and the executive office building. I forget.
This
what
is
it's
Judge
called.
Todd Campbell.
Judge Todd, later Judge Todd Campbell.
Right.
But at the time,
United States
he
District
was
Court.
working, he was the lawyer for the vice president and assigning parking spaces on the White House grounds to the highest. And I thought, this is the highest muckety muck in Washington I will ever know. And I bought a hat while I was there. And when I wore that hat, I thought about how well my friend was doing. And then my law firm would say, well, then the next time I get, well, where's your hat? And I discovered three things about wearing hats. One, when it wasn't about branding, I discovered that everyone would talk to me when I wore a hat. I'm talking about wait staff and homeless people and people in the grocery stores and people in court. And I discovered that, so that was in 1992 that I went to that seminar. I discovered that men love women in hats. I was a single mom, whatever. And I discovered that you look confident when you wear a hat.
It used to be in the 1940s and 1950s that women in business always wore a hat in the office.
And I wish, Dorothy Campbell had worn a hat before, and I wish I could convince some young lawyer to do it because it turned out to be the most amazing branding ever. I'm the woman with the hat. Now I will say it's hard on somebody who thinks that they should know everyone's name, because my brain just went, okay, Barbara, and we were meant to know as many names as we can want to in a village. We weren't meant to know this many names, and the hat became a problem. Now, I also began to be involved in commemorating women's suffrage for the 75th anniversary of suffrage. That was amazingly fun. I just called it the Dysfunctional Commission from Hell. That's where I met Thelma Harper and became great friends with Thelma.
She was a remarkable person.
Oh my gosh, she was great to know.
You were also one of the formative members of LAW, Lawyers Association for Women, right from the start. How did that happen? How did you?
You know, I was, they included me, but I was at this point had a baby at home and maybe two babies at home, maybe just one baby, not sure about that. So I was active, but it wasn't until that 12-year mark that I really poured myself into LAW. Well, I was never more honored than to be president of LAW.
Well,
Never
you
more
were a
honored.
great president also.
Well,
You
yeah.
made some wonderful changes.
Now, there was a book that really changed my understanding of law that came out about this time. It was a book written by a linguist called You Just Don't Understand. And she was Deborah Tannen.
That was a famous book when that came out.
Yes. And it was so important. She was a professor of sociolinguistics. And it was about how women communicate and how men communicate. It doesn't put either side down. So for example, a man might say, a woman might say to her husband on the way home, honey, would you like to stop and get a drink? And he says no. And what the woman meant was, I would like to stop and get a drink. So women can communicate very indirectly. Men, though, compete when they communicate. All that sports talk and political talk in my law firms was competition. Men don't talk about their mistakes. And suddenly, and women connect. So I really realized that it wasn't that the men didn't support me, it's that wasn't their style of communication. So I not only got so much out of being in LAW, I joined a women's breakfast group. And, you know, I walked in there once and said, I have a mean 14-year-old. And they said, oh, honey, we understand. You know, you get that kind of support in a women's group. But at this point, I became so committed to mentoring. And one thing I created is the mistake okay zone. You know, there are two ways of responding to what happened to you. You can say everybody ought to have it as hard as I had it, or you can say nobody should have it as hard as I had it. So I was tremendously committed to mentoring women and men. And one of the things I did was to create that okay zone, that you
What
could
is
come
that?
in and tell me that you made a mistake.
Mhm.
I'll tell you about a worse mistake I made, and then we'll figure out how to fix your mistake.
That's a wonderful opportunity,
Yeah.
because I think lawyers so often learn from mistakes. That's
Well,
how
we're
we
human.
get better.
We're human. I also began to write for the Tennessean in this
Yes.
period. So I wrote my first, I don't know how I decided to do this. I wrote my first op-ed piece on how to be a working mom. It may have been the best piece I ever wrote. It should be published today because every word of it is true. I began to write op-ed pieces, like I wrote that you shouldn't try people in the press. You know, I wrote from my position as chair of the Board of Professional Responsibility. And then I was asked to write articles about employment law. Now, really, employment law came along and I'm like, oh my God, I will be fully employed forever. Because the optics were so good to have your woman lawyer represent you when you were the defendant in an employment law case. Oh my gosh. And I'm like, sexual harassment, I'll be employed forever. And the stories are so good.
And you
Oh
wrote,
my
you wrote about 90 articles for the Tennessee.
Oh yeah, I've written more than 90 articles. So I've written a lot for a long time. Every 2 weeks, I had an article in the Tennessee.
You did a
Yeah.
lot of transformation of yourself.
Yeah.
You mentioned the 12-year time when all of this began to emerge and you began to make some. How did your style change?
Well, I became more confident. And I used the things that were an advantage. I remember I once was in the Supreme Court and the judge in the middle didn't know me, and I got up there and argued with my hat on. He kept going. And I'm like, okay, whatever it is that makes him want me to win, I'm good with that. You know, if he thinks I'm cute in the hat, or he thinks he's just surprised that I can talk. Okay.
But you
So-
began to recognize those subtle, those cues that.
Well,
that
you know,
needed.
every lawyer uses. Now, really, one thing I've noticed about women lawyers, they thought we couldn't try lawsuits, but women are communicators. I have never seen a woman stand up in front of the court and drone on and on while the judge flips through papers. So I think that that was really important. Now, I want to talk about a case that was really important transition for me. And this is an important story for lawyers to know. I had a case for the Bill Gates of Europe. He was the founder, one of the 4 founders of SAP. This case was in front of another judge that I don't mind calling out, Tom Higgins. Now, Tom Higgins was very tough on lawyers, and he would give you 2 months for discovery and then give you a really hard time if you wanted to extend discovery. At 2 months, my client, the Bill Gates of Europe, worth $1.5 billion, which the other side wanted to bring out in the jury trial, he hadn't been deposed. So we went in front of Judge Higgins, and I asked him to extend discovery by 30 days, and he got angry. And he said, he can be present on December 10, and if he's not present, I'm going to dismiss this lawsuit. So I went back to my client, and he was scheduled to be in front of 500 people in Canada on December 10. Now, I had a co-counsel in New York. Opposing counsel here in Nashville had written me a letter about my pushy New York co-counsel. And my New York co-counsel, Paul Summit, said, "Oh, Barbara, he means I'm a pushy New York Jew." So I went, after this blow up in front of Judge Higgins, I went to my co-counsel and said, "Well, just give me a date that you can be present in the next month, and I'll throw myself on the sword in front of Judge Higgins. I'll ask for, just tell him that my client is supposed to be in front of 500 people in Canada." And this lawyer refused to give me a date and said, "Your co-counsel is just a pushy New York Jew." I went, "I can't believe you said that. That's what he said you meant." Okay, so I put this all in an affidavit and asked for another 30 days. Then, and I guess, then my client canceled. I didn't get the 30 days. My client canceled the meeting in front of 500 people in Canada. And then the case was going to go to trial in January. The judge had 5 cases set for a Tuesday. And on the Friday night before this was supposed to take place, my 14-year-old daughter was arrested. That's a whole other story, for acting out and taken to juvenile court. And for the only time in my life, I asked for a continuance on that Monday. And I went in front of Judge Higgins. He called in a court reporter to take it all down. And when I told him I asked for a continuance, I said, "This child has schizophrenia and drug addiction in her background. I need a continuance for personal reasons." And he said, "I'm not going to give you a continuance. The lawyers in this case haven't gotten along," because I had filed that affidavit about the anti-Semitism. By the way, my opposing counsel said, "I have Jew friends in the newspaper." Okay. The next morning, we had an ice storm that night.
Monday night.
Monday night, we had an
On
ice
top of
storm.
everything else.
We had an ice storm. I had parked my car at the foot of my driveway. I got in my car, and for the 50 yards in front of my house, my wheels never got any purchase on the ground. So I went back up to my house to call to try to get a ride downtown. And Pat Lavarini, his clerk, called me and said, "Barbara, he's continued all of the cases set for today." And I burst into tears. She said, "Barbara, how are you? Are you okay?"
She was Pat Lavarini.
And we tried that case to a conclusion. I got $175,000 of punitive damages against the other side. And I just have to, I was so naive about the level of anti-Semitism.
That's a story.
So then I went to Wyatt, Tarrant and Co.
Yes.
That's when I broke through the glass ceiling. Charles Bone, bless him, said he wanted me for my leadership skills.
You certainly had shown leadership skills with all the
Wow.
all the bar committees that you were at LAW. It went on and
Yeah.
on. What you had
But
been doing.
in my law firms, I had to move because I realized that if I were a male, they'd be saying, "Oh my gosh, this person is such a superstar, and he's raising his kids too." And instead, they were saying, "Aren't we nice to let this single mom work here?" Now, I want to talk about one thing before I go to Wyatt, though. I want to talk about parental leave. While I was at my second law firm, an associate became pregnant, and she had a condition that made her disabled. And when she was about 8 months pregnant, she passed out at the airport. And my firm handled it by saying, "If you don't take better care of yourself, we're not going to make you a partner." So me, in complete naivety, I went to her group leader and I said, "Okay, just tell me that she's going to get the same leave that you would give an associate who had a heart attack," which was the law. And this team leader said, "Well, no, she chose to get pregnant." I was horrified. I went back to talk to him and said, "Wait a minute, that's not law." He said, "Oh, you'll have to talk to the managing partner." The managing partner came to me and said, "Oh, we're going to give her just what we give the staff, which is 4 weeks of leave and then a week for every 2 years that you've worked here," or whatever it was. And these people were so generous. I knew to a moral certainty that if an associate had a heart attack, they would have given him 90 days until the short-term disability kicked in. I just knew it to a moral certainty.
Yes.
So I said, "I don't believe you, and I'm going to have to hear my partner's vote on it." So they agreed to give her maternity leave while she was disabled. Okay. So I took that experience and said, "Okay, what can I do with this? How can I make lemonade out of lemons?"
Yes.
And that's when I wrote an article for the Tennessee Bar Association called "Developing a Parental Leave Policy for the Lawyers in Your Firm." And I argued that the American College of OBGYNs at that time said that a normal period of disability for a woman with a vaginal delivery was 6 weeks. So I said, well, okay, if you're going to give women parental leave of 8 weeks, you really ought to give men 2 weeks. So then I went back to my firm and said, okay, this is going to come out in the Tennessee Bar Association as the lead article, along with a page about me. And so could we have a parental leave policy in our firm? And they said no. And they came back to me and said, well, we can't give men 2 weeks off. Okay, so then, and I want to hold this up for the camera here. This is I hope that you can see it. Oh, okay, let me hold it. Oh, I'm holding it in the wrong place. Here we go. So there's that. I hope, I can't see the screen.
Yes.
Okay. Developing a parental leave policy. And then it's so sweet.
Oh, look at that.
A whole page.
Oh my goodness. There you are with your babies.
With my babies.
Oh, isn't that wonderful?
Isn't it sweet?
That's a beautiful picture.
And that was a picture I gave to myself for my 40th birthday. And they quote me and talk about, it is the name of the article, "There is life after parental leave." And so the day that came out, my law firm, not a single person said a word to me. And they never said one word about that article or about the article about me.
How strange that is.
Yeah.
How strange.
And the next person that asked for parental leave got 4 weeks.
And that's frustrating, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, so that's sort of the whole background. And then I went to work at Wyatt here in Cummings, and then broke through the glass ceiling, corner office on the top floor, hiring partner,
How many years were you in practice before you went to Wyatt?
19 years.
19.
Broke through the glass ceiling at 19 years. Now,
Now, during this time, other people were noticing, obviously, that you were exceptional, that you had done some remarkable things and made a number of achievements. And it was around that time that that women's groups were recognizing the women who had made strides, who had achieved. Tell us about the Athena Award.
well, first of all, I got nominated 4 times, but 3 times by the women lawyers. And one time by my breakfast club. And the last time I was nominated, I was like, I had the worst headache. Oh my gosh, I got to go up there and lose again. But I won. Every time I was so thrilled to be mentioned in the same breath with the women who get nominated for the Athena Award. It's an amazing award.
It is, and it is for remarkable women who have made strides. And just listening to you, there are some things that you did that took more than an ounce of courage to do. And it made a difference. Made a difference for women and also for men. That's it takes.
Well, it was lovely, and that was right about the time that I had married. In fact, that happened the same year that I married my husband, and I quoted Body Rate. I found you in the nick of time.
And tell us about your husband. Who is he?
Well, I hope they put in this picture. After 22 years of being a trial lawyer, I married and a single parent. I married a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst. And Brenda Dowdle said to me, "That'll save you a lot of money." And he is such a dear man. And his superpower is that he never judges anyone.
That's quite a.
I waited for the right man. And
I want to jump back, but we needed to be sure that we spoke about him.
Right.
You also had worked, I think, at Stites and Harbison.
Before I get to Stites and Harbison, I want to talk about a couple of incredibly fun lawsuits that just ought to be part of my story. One is that I had a lawsuit over teeny beanie baby. So Thai, the company that made teeny beanie babies, were giving them to McDonald's, and McDonald's was selling them out the back door, and they were ending up on Shop at Home. And that's how the lawsuit happened. But the main point of that lawsuit is that I was in front of Aleda Trauger. And at one point when we were arguing in front of her, she said to the other lawyer, "Don't interrupt Ms. Moss." And I wanted to turn around and say that word. "Don't interrupt Ms. Moss." Then I had a case about sex. I had 2 cases about sex toys.
It's amazing what you do in a day.
And the reason you will say, "How did they find you, Barbara?" And the answer is, they came to me because I was chair of the Board of Professional Responsibility.
Oh, wow.
And they thought that the other lawyer was unethical. You don't know where your cases are going to come
That's
from.
amazing.
And so I dragged these young lawyers in that case with me. We had so much fun. We had so much fun. At one point, we had a deposition with the sex toys lined up down the middle of the conference room table. Yes, I won't say anything.
It would be very hard to make up something like that, wouldn't it?
But I also had the first fully belted child killed by an airbag in America. It was here in Nashville.
Really?
Yes. Wow. I had the people that were walking down Broadway when the transformer exploded. You know, I just was
These are remarkable.
so lucky. I had another Lanham Act case about pencil design. You know, I was just every case. I had cases about, oh, hauling hogs to the sausage factory, you know, Coors, packaging Coors beer. You know, it was just wonderful. You can't make it up.
No, you cannot.
You can't make it up.
And you become an expert in all kinds of areas that you never dreamt that you would know anything about.
Right. Now, Wyatt actually broke up. Okay.
Yes.
And I'm willing to tell that story because it involves bad actors who didn't even live in Nashville. So there I was the hiring partner. Charles Boult was the managing partner. And in the summer before 9/11, there was a dip in the economy. And the managing partner in Louisville decided that all of the offices had to experience pain from this, and that we had to fire a first-year associate because he didn't have enough hours. And so while we were still struggling with them not to do this, this young man found out that he had been fired through the outplacement firm. Now, Charles Boult had said, if you do this, I won't be your managing partner anymore. How stupid was that? Charles Boult had a history of jumping ship with all his people. So Charles left with all his people. And I lost the 2 lawyers and the 4 paralegals that I was working with, because how can you stay when, you know, nobody can say we'll protect you.
Right.
And at that point, I left and went to Stites because they just didn't treat people well. And at Stites, my next law firm, I found that I had to prove myself again. And I'd really become pigeonholed doing employment law defense because of all the articles that I've written. So
At one point, you joined forces with John and Chris Norris.
I did. And it was the employment law cases fell out of the big firms because about 5 years before that happened, insurance companies began to offer employment practices, policies. And so all those cases went to boutique law firms. And I went to my firm at the time and said, well, I think I'd like to try estate planning. And they said, no. And I'm like, what do you mean, no? And so I went out, I'd married Tom, somebody had my back. And my kids had grown up. I wasn't the sole support of my 2 kids. And so I went with John and Chris, who were dear, dear friends and dear people and great lawyers. And I had this ability to take a step back. And at one point, I always tell people, I picked up my head and said, you know, litigation is kind of stressful.
You finally noticed.
And psychoanalysts never quit. Now, there's this myth that we all retire at age 65. It is just, it's a myth. It's not true. Some of us keep on being active, and especially psychoanalysts. Now, I really think it's all the relationships they'd have to grieve if they quit. But so at age 60 or so, I looked around and said, you know, there's this thing called elder law. And at age 63, I reinvented myself and started my own practice doing elder law.
That was a big step.
It was crazy. It's this trial lawyer part of me. Elder law is a very hard law practice. Because it involves, it's the only practice that's defined by the age of the people. And it involves so many specialties. It involves estate planning. It involves Medicaid. It involves Medicare. It involves VA benefits. It involves probate. It has conservatorship.
It's really a generic name for a broad
huge range of specialties.
Yeah.
But
and had you any experience in any of those?
Probate, some, conservatorship, some, estate planning, a little with Chris and John. So I studied for the CELA exam and took it like it was only 1 year into my law practice when I took this exam to be an expert. I failed it. Only exam I've ever failed.
Oh.
But, you know, only 30% of the people that take it pass. But, and, you know, frankly, you shouldn't be able to become an expert after a year of law practice. But it made me really study it.
Yes.
It made me really study it. And also I believe in teaching. I do a lot of teaching because when you teach, you really learn.
Are you teaching at Vanderbilt still?
No, after 20 years, I quit teaching as an adjunct at Vanderbilt, but then Bill Coe came to me and said, Barbara, we just couldn't think of anybody that we would want to teach elder law at the Nashville School of Law except you. And I said, well, Bill, that's kind of the right flattery. And besides, I'll really have to learn the material.
Well, Dean Coe made a good choice.
So I've been teaching elder law at the Nashville School of Law, and I love teaching. But you know, the first time I taught it was last spring. It had 47 law students over Zoom.
Wow.
But
Wow.
anyway, the practice about what I love, and now my firm has a lawyer, paralegals, it has a benefit specialist, it has a social worker. And one of the things I was committed to doing was this. I am not gonna supervise people the way they supervise people in law firms. In law firms, they call you in and criticize you once a year. And I don't do that. I coach people. So I coach people. I don't tie their raises to it. I want to give them honest feedback. I want to give them honest feedback close to the time that they've made mistakes. And I love that part about it.
You learned a lot from your own experience.
I did. I learned a lot about, and so this has been a learning experience, how to set up a website, how to do search engine optimization.
And you've had to learn how to do things like advertise, for example.
That's right. I started advertising not because of my competition, but because people don't know they need an elder law attorney.
Yes.
And here's why I love elder law. And maybe that's the most important part. I love taking people's anxiety away.
That's a big
And you know, they come to me, their dad, their spouse has gone into a nursing home. They don't know what to do. Somebody has dementia. They don't know what to do. So that's been the source of my and so I still love the practice of law.
And
Yeah.
you're helping people make their first steps.
Yes.
Into getting their feet on the ground again.
Yes.
After something
Yes.
big has happened in their
Yes.
lives and in the lives maybe of their parents, for example.
Now, my girls, okay, we've got to talk about how I'm living the life of my dreams.
Well, of course we do.
Okay, my girls live in Nashville. My husband's 3 children live in Nashville. All 5 of our children live in Nashville. We have won the Parenthood Lottery. We have won the Parenthood Lottery. And when people complain about traffic in Nashville, I always say there are worse problems to have than prosperity. So, you know, it's only a prosperous town that gets all your children back.
And you have an absolutely beautiful puppy named Harley.
Yes, we do. And
who is the official greeter in your house, I
we do.
believe.
We have 7 grandchildren, 11 and under. They all live in Nashville. None of our children are doctors or lawyers. I don't know.
You feel like a quota.
You know, I've heard this wonderful therapist talk about how, you know, when your parents have money, you think money was the problem. Well, when your parents are a doctor and a lawyer, you think maybe that was the problem.
And you and your husband also travel to far away places.
We as long as we're working, and our children are all doing well. They all have landed. Nobody's addicted to anything. They have good jobs. My girls have rejected me some. They have but thank God I know how to find a therapist. They have created the right space between us. You know, when you're a single mom, we were like this.
Yes.
And they had to renegotiate that space. And I had to be on the periphery and they had to be at the center. And we have renegotiated that space. My husband and I do these amazing trips. This year, after our trip has been canceled for 2 years in a row because of COVID, we're going to fly to Bodrum, Turkey, get on a boat and sail to the Cyclades Islands around Greece. And then in the fall, we're going to Morocco, but we've gone to China twice. We've gone to Zimbabwe. We've gone to the South Island of New Zealand.
And
We've
don't
gone
forget
to
Egypt.
Egypt. We've gone to Egypt. We've gone to Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. We've gone to Italy. We've gone to France. We've gone to England. We've gone to Ireland.
That's beautiful. I want to finish our discussion with something that you wrote. And I want you to explain this. You said we will not have equity until women reach the top in representative numbers. And
It's getting better, but we will not have complete equity until women reach the top in representative numbers. Now, we've seen that on the Tennessee Supreme Court. I don't worry about what's going to happen to me in the Tennessee Supreme Court. But in law firms, it's still been a struggle. There's still things to overcome. And we're making it. Every time I see a woman named as managing partner, I'm like thrilled. Because we do the work. Women do a lot of the work. Women have made such strides at being president of the bar organizations. But we really won't have full equity until women reach the top. Well, gosh, it should be 50% everywhere. Women are, 50% of the population. Women make up more than 50% of the law school classes. And that will happen. That will happen.
that's a hopeful way to end this wonderful discussion. You have made such a difference for so many of us who came along and who benefited from courage, from determination, from risk-taking, all of which you started to demonstrate just even as a young woman in college. And for that, we will always be grateful, Barbara, to you and the other groundbreaking women who came along just at the right time, who opened the doors for women and for men. So, and every time those doors are opened, the ones who benefit from it the most are members of the public.
That's so true. Because suddenly everybody, the practice of law is not Disney.
And right.
And we need to get everybody's point of view on the bench and in the bar and taking cases and advocating for people and everybody.
And the law has to look like each one of us.
It has to.
Thank you, Barbara Moss.
Thank you, Mary.